in that moment, God told me, John, it's when you're feeling at your lowest is when I enjoy being a dad because I get to remind you to me, you're still the greatest. And I just started crying.
Speaking on generational pains and trauma, how would one even recognize that they have that? And how would they even heal from it? Where can they begin? We always hear about, oh, God loves you, like, God is love, all this stuff. We hear it so many times as Christians, but many of us haven't felt or
Hmm.
experienced the tangible presence of God's love. How can one experience that? Hey everyone, welcome back to the pod. We are super stoked to have John Chen on this podcast. We are diving into a topic that is actually one of my favorite topics, the topic of generational pains and traumas and how that impacts us today, how that impacts our success. John is awesome. He's really big into mental, emotional, and spiritual health, and we're just so excited to dive deep into this conversation. So, for those people who don't know who you are, how would you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about your background.
I work as a educational consultant and life coach. So what that entails is really helping students in high school figure out who they are, figure out what are their values and how they want to express that through high school, all the way culminating to their college applications. But a big reason why I started to do this was because I really had a really stressful time in high school, especially with my parents, especially with academics and getting everything ready for college. And so I really wanted to be kind of that big brother that I kind of wish I had, and I did have at church for my students today. And so I used to work in finance and was doing this work actually for free. And I helped about 100 kids apply to college just for fun. And I realized, man, if I enjoy doing this so much for free, maybe I should make this into my career. And so I've been doing college counseling and life coaching for the past 10 years. And this past year, started my own firm with my wife.
I'm really curious to know your transition from finance. I'm sure you were had a pretty lucrative career in finance. What actually made you, what was the turning point for you to switch from finance to college counseling and college coaching?
I think there were two big milestones. I think one was I had a mentor always tell me, wherever you are, John, look 10 years ahead to the people who you're working with. Look at their lives, look at their careers, look at who they are. Do you want to be there in 10 years? And the truth is, I had some great bosses in my financial firm. I think where their lives were, it was just a little bit more stressful than what I had imagined for myself. As once you're a director or a partner at an accounting firm, it's a life encompassing kind of work. And I think that wasn't what I had in mind. I think the second thing is that I had been doing this on the side, and this had been bringing me great satisfaction. As I think helping people tell and retell their stories is a huge part of the healing journey. Right? You get to integrate all the parts of your stories that maybe some parts you don't like, maybe some parts you're ashamed of, but if you can speak about it and share openly, it becomes a part of you versus a part you want to reject. And so as I had been doing more of that work, I had prayed and asked God to give me a vision. And he gave me a very clear vision that I need to step out in faith and do something that is not as stable, maybe not as lucrative, but is where he wanted me to go for my next step of growth and trusting in him.
Hmm. What were the parts of you, whether good or bad, would you say pointed you in this direction? As you were like reflecting, you were probably going through like past pain and all of that. Like, tell me a little bit more about your process with that pivot.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I think I had always wanted to do something in education because I had been serving in youth group with Awana and VBS since I was 14 all the way throughout college. And this is why I had been, doing the college counseling just on the side. But making that pivot was pretty scary. And I think the biggest thing I was afraid of was disappointing my parents, right? I mean, they had
Mm,
sacrificed so much for me to flee China, to come here with nothing, working their way up, having me go to a great school and a great college. And so I think that was something that I had to bring to God. And it was really interesting because I had this time of reflection on a retreat I went to before I made my decision. And God gave me this really clear vision. It was such a clear sign that I needed to take a step because I saw a picture of my old company logo. It was
mm.
PwC, and it was on the ground, just very flat. And I saw a picture of myself as a janitor, you know, which is definitely not what I had in mind. But I had a mop, and I was just cleaning the logo on the floor over and over again, like wiping it, cleaning it, and I wasn't going anywhere. And I said, okay, I mean, I think that's how I feel in my career right now. It's kind of in a stasis mode. And then I saw a picture of the logo of the educational company that I was going to work for. And it was in 3D. It was like a sculpture in stone. And I was just standing in front of it, being very still. And then all of a sudden, the logo exploded. And I flew off the screen in my mind's eye. And I was like, wow, that's also not like super encouraging in some ways, you know? It's not
Yeah.
like me flying to the mountain or me, getting this gift. But as I prayed about it, I realized, at least with that second vision, there was movement, there was action, and I couldn't see what was next, but it wasn't me polishing the floor all the time to infinity, right?
Yeah.
And so when God gave me that confirmation, it was incredible encouragement. I was able to tell my parents, hey, I did the path that you wanted me to. Got my CPA, worked in finance, hit that salary that you told me to hit, but it wasn't fully fulfilling. And I want to take this leap of faith. And to my surprise, while my parents were frightened to say the least, they actually supported me. And I think a big part of that was they saw the confidence that I had and the confidence that God gave me that this was the next step that I wanted to take.
How was home life for you growing up? What was your relationship with your mom and dad like?
It was pretty up and down, tumultuous at times. My parents, they loved me a lot and they did their best. But, as you know, immigrant parents, they come to America with a lot of the burdens and also the blessings of having grown up in another country and also having to go through just that really stressful time of immigrating and coming to a country with nothing. And so I think with my mom, she was as supportive as she could be, but a lot of times she was just trying to figure out how to manage the home, take care of me and the dad. And so emotionally, we weren't that close. And so that was a little bit hard for me. And then for my dad, excuse me, he was very busy at work and someone who in China, he was bullied. He was sick a lot. His family life wasn't very good. And so when he came to America, he really didn't know how to handle stress well. And so he took that out in ways that are both physical and emotional to me and my mom. So that was tough.
Wow. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, I asked that question because on the topic of generational trauma, I feel
Yeah.
like a lot of the pains that we have influence us now, even though we don't really realize
Yeah.
it. It just looks a different way. And
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's a myriad of pains that we all as individuals go through
Mm-hmm.
throughout life. But I want to touch base on the topic of generational trauma. And
Mm.
for some people who are listening to this or even watching this, maybe this is the first time that they've heard of it.
Yeah.
So we hear this term a lot, like generational trauma, generational pain, generational curses, generational inheritance, even in the church.
Mm-hmm.
So how would you define generational pain or trauma or whatever you want to call it?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question, Alex. I've heard a lot of good definitions, but how I've internalized it after thinking about my family's legacy and also pain is really attempting to live out either your parents' dreams or avoiding your parents' nightmares in a way that's inauthentic to you.
Wow. I feel like I need to like record that.
Yeah,
So, hmm.
what's coming up to you as I say that phrase?
Yeah, I feel like for me, because my parents are Vietnamese immigrants, so they immigrated from Vietnam after the war. And similar to you, there was a lot of pressure to succeed. I think many Asian Americans can relate with that. So,
Mm-hmm.
for a really long time, both of my parents lived vicariously through me. Like they wanted me to
Mm.
be successful. I didn't know it. I didn't know their influence was so powerful on me at the time as growing
Mm-hmm.
up. But they wanted me to do well in school. Go to a good university, get a good job, make a lot of money, have stability, and all that stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
so it definitely influenced me in many ways. And if I diverted from that, they would get mad. And I remember one time when I was deciding to go to college, I got accepted into USC, the University of Southern California,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a pretty expensive school. So that's pretty public information. But I told my dad that I didn't want to do engineering. He wanted me to do engineering, but I didn't want to do engineering. I wanted to do business. I eventually didn't go to USC, but just me verbalizing that, hey, I don't want to do engineering. Me and my dad had such a big fight about that, and I actually stormed out of the house because I was just so
Mm.
upset because I didn't feel supported by him. Like I just got into USC. A lot of people would dream to go to this school or get admitted to it. That's just like one example of some of the instances with the interactions with my parents.
Mm, Your example is still so present in my students' lives where the parents, like the dream is, hey, I suffered and struggled so much. So now I want you to have that stability as a blessing, right? Because I work so you don't have to struggle in the same ways. And so they push their students to consider the four most lucrative majors like biology, business, CS, and engineering. And a lot of
Mm,
my students struggle to either agree to that and wonder why their parents can't respect them as fully formed individuals, or they may agree but really lose part of their spirit as they acquiesce to their parents. And then in
mm.
college, some of those tensions come out, right?
Do you feel like people regret the decisions that they made? Like, for example, their parents push them towards a certain direction without them really realizing it, and then they get into a certain career or profession, and then down the line, maybe they have like some regret or disappointment, like, oh, I wish I could have lived my life more, or I wish I could have taken risks more. Do you find that among even your friends or clients?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think for myself, my parents pushed me to do business because honestly, they knew my math skills probably weren't as good as yours, and so I couldn't be an engineer. And I think for me and a lot of my friends, it's like if your parents push you really firmly in one direction, right? It comes with both assets and liabilities, right? The asset is, oh, I have my CPA, I have experience in finance, and that's really helped me in starting my own business and doing projections, doing financial calculations, doing taxes. But the liability and some of the drawbacks of that is some of like the richest times of my youth, maybe I didn't have that time to explore, right?
Mm,
And so now I have to put in some additional work to be able to explore that while I have kids and managing a mortgage and managing adult life. And so I think for me and my friends who are older, if you have done some inner work, you can see that it's not all bad or all good, but like anything, it comes with both good and bad parts, and you have some assets to work with and some liabilities to work through.
mm.
Is that how you found to be your experience too?
Yeah, I definitely love the way that you pictured it. It's neither good or bad. There's definitely,
Mm-hmm.
like assets and liabilities with it all. Like for me, my parents just generally pushed me towards like more stability. It
Yeah.
didn't really matter whether it was engineering or being a doctor, but just like I just want you to have a lucrative job and have some stability.
Mm-hmm.
But because of that, I actually developed a lot of. So I got pushed in the direction of tech. That's where I eventually landed,
Mm-hmm.
or spent most of my career. And because of that, I developed tech skills. Like, yeah, I'm good with computers. I'm scrappy. I can figure stuff out. I
Mm-hmm.
can do project management, which is very helpful for the business that we're running now.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, there was a lot of, I guess the word is, I felt trapped in a
Mm.
way. Like, not now, but for a while before doing the inner work, I did feel a little bit of being trapped. Like, why do I have to confine to my parents' expectations of
Mm-hmm.
me? Why can't I like explore other things? Why can't I take risk? And because of what they imposed on me, I actually had a hard time taking risks. So
Mm.
even like starting this business for me and Grace, it's actually a big leap of faith for me, because I've always been pushed down this conventional, more stable route. Nothing wrong with it at all.
Right.
But that's just my natural default. So just taking risks and doing things that are unconventional is definitely more uncomfortable.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I really found is I have friends who are artists or musicians that have done the other route, and now they have to transition to a 9 to 5 to support their family, to pay for their
Mm,
mortgage. So they went from feeling very free earlier in life to feeling more trapped now. So I just feel like you have to trade one for the other sometimes. And there's some pockets in life where you can have both in more equality. But I feel like anyone who is either following their dreams or following what is based on responsibility or duty, you have to kind of make that choice between stability or feeling the freedom, right?
yeah. Why do you think, particularly for Asian families, I can't speak on other like ethnicities, for Asian families especially, there is a big focus on career and money, and it's a narrative that's been reinforced throughout their childhood and into adulthood. Why do you think there's such a large emphasis on career and money or safety and security?
I mean, for my parents, it's all about not having me suffer like they did with the instability. And I remember just my dad telling me how during the Cultural Revolution, he wasn't sure when his next meal was going to come from. He had to wear the same pair of pants for like 3 months in a row, and his friends made fun of him. And I think it's that fear of, I want to make sure my kids can not have the same experiences. But I think also for all parents, and I'm a parent now, you want some validation that you're doing good, and in Asian culture, there's not a lot of verbal affirmation, verbal love. And so it has to come from the result. It has to come from your actions. It has to come from them recognizing you've earned or achieved something, right? And I think there's nothing wrong with that. But I think sometimes that balance of how love is given and received and interpreted leans maybe too much towards action and achievement and not enough towards emotional connection or intimacy or just really enjoying each other's company, which I still don't know if my parents really understand what that means.
Yeah, even with my friends, my Asian American friends, they're always saying like, "Oh, my dad doesn't say anything. He's
Yeah.
so quiet," or like common Asian dad stereotype. They never get hugs. Hugs are weird. Speaking on generational pains and trauma, how would one even recognize that they have that, and how would they even heal from it? Where can they begin? Big question.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? I've thought about this a lot, Alex, and you recognize it when you are in a close relationship with another individual, right? Whether that's with your spouse, within a friend group, with your parents, even with your coworkers, right? And you see how other people who maybe have had a healthy upbringing treat you, love you, react when you do something wrong. And when you see the difference between how they do it or how they treat you versus what you thought was the appropriate way or the expected way to react, then you can start to see, some of maybe your trauma and how it has affected you. I think obviously the other way is, you're experiencing some mental health issues as you face challenges in your life that maybe your parents have not prepared you for, whether that's like losing a job, losing a loved one, maybe not getting that promotion, right? And you're expecting your parents potentially to do something for you or to comfort you in some way. Then maybe that doesn't happen, and you start to wonder, hey, I don't feel comfortable going to my parents with this. Is that normal? Is that right?
Can you give an example of like even a mental health symptom that one could experience who's gone through generational trauma?
For me personally, it's always having the constant anxiety that I need to be doing more, right? And the
Hmm.
perfectionism.
Wow.
And so for that, how that manifested in my work was overwork to the point where I developed depression, right? Overwork to the point where I had to be, answering every email, every text within an hour because it was my business. And thinking that, and I think this is the part that it's most kind of insidious, is that if you really, are dedicated to your work, resting is not needed. It's weak. It's silly,
Hmm.
right? And so me purposely saying, as an entrepreneur, I need to work 7 days a week, like my dad did when he was an engineer, or I'm not really being responsible. And
Yeah.
then I burned out. And then I saw, hey, where did this mindset come from? And I started to unearth where that generational trauma came from.
That's very interesting because overworking it's not like a sin, so to speak. It's not like obvious. Maybe
Yeah,
your
yeah.
work could be an idol for high achieving people and go getters. How do you even strike the balance between pursuing success and not overdoing it in an unhealthy way?
Yeah, that's such an insightful question, Alex. And I thought about this a lot. And as I've talked with my spiritual director and gone to therapy, I think God's really shown me that it comes down to the season of life you're in.
Hmm.
And for me, I've seen that if God's calling me to a season of focus, as He did when I was starting my first college counseling firm 10 years ago, that does require some immense dedication of time, money, resources, and by default, some things need to be sacrificed. And so I did tell Lynn, hey, my wife, hey, I think, we will still do our date night, but maybe we can't have every weekend be like a hangout time with friends like we had before because I need to be working because I feel like God's called me to start this business and this is the vision. And she understood that. But there's also seasons of balance, right? Where God's calling you to rest. You've done good work, been a faithful servant. And those seasons I think are even harder for Asian Americans because they don't
Hmm.
know, and I'm still learning what appropriate godly biblical rest looks like. And so I think that's what the biggest thing I've realized. If you're close to God and God is telling you this is the season, and he's with you in that season, then no matter what season you're in, you will have peace.
How do you know what season you're in? Because someone could say, I feel God is calling me to work harder in my career and be a a
Yeah.
good quote unquote steward in my
Mhm.
job for the next 20, 30 years. Like, what are some of the tangible ways that you can discern your season?
For me, seasons are kind of like being in love, you know? Like you definitely know when you're not in love, but you definitely don't know when you are in love, right?
Right.
And so uh, I think for seasons, it's clear usually like when you're not in a certain season, right? So, for instance, like for me, this is a season of rest, right? And I know it is true because my wife, Lynn, in a very gentle but firm way, confronted me and said, "Hey, John, you ran your past business for 10 years. I felt like I was a second wife to your business.
Oh,
I feel
ouch.
like, yeah, that was painful for me to hear, you know?"
Yeah.
She said, my affection for you and for our marriage is at an all-time low, and I sometimes really wonder, like, is this what we had in mind for what our marriage would be in 10 years, you know? And so that was a big wake-up call for me, you know, and I wanted to keep on pushing, but God used my wife to
Mm,
remind me there's more important things than achieving stability or success, right? And
yeah.
so having the people in your life kind of they'll tell you if you're out of balance, if you have close people who love you and care for you. I mean, the second thing is every year I try to take a retreat just by myself for 2 days to pray, and I started doing it's called a life map. Basically, you draw out your life on a timeline, and you use a post-it. So for green post-it for good things, a red post-it for not so good things, and you actually start to see the seasons of your life. And so when I did that for the past 10 years, I saw it was mostly red. And I was like,
Wow.
wow, that is a huge wake-up call, because I didn't realize how hard things have been the past 10 years, and that's why I burned out. And then as I prayed about it, it wasn't anything supernatural. I just felt God telling me, you know, John, this year you need to take less clients, you need to take higher quality clients, and potentially make less money, because a season of rest is a special time, and it's not just rest for rest's sake, but to do something else in the future while you're getting a chance to recuperate and enjoy what it means to be my son, to have enough without you having to work for it, and to just be still and know I'm God.
I can imagine just how that felt.
Yeah, that was a really humbling conversation. I think it was, you know, those conversations where it's like, you know, it's a turning point in your life or in a relationship.
Yeah.
And I had always prided myself that, like, I'm not like my dad. I'm emotionally aware and engaged. But, you know, sometimes just life gets too busy and you need your loved ones to give you wake up call. And I'm thankful that my wife, can do it in a way where it's like direct, but also it didn't like hurt my feelings, or it didn't, you know, cause me to feel insecure.
What about for people who don't have a significant other, or for lack of a better word, like closer friends to really call them out? Maybe they do have close friends, but maybe the person hasn't given permission to for the close friends to
Mm.
invite feedback in or to call them out on things. And a lot of our listeners are not married.
Mm-hmm.
So I know you mentioned life mapping, and I think it's easy for people to kind of go at a certain pace. And
Mm-hmm.
even though on the outside, if you were to look at their life, oh, like, okay, I think they're gonna burn out. But for them, they're
Mm-hmm.
so in it, like they're grinding away for the next like 5, 10 years. Maybe they don't even realize it and they think it's normal. Like, hey, this is my normal operating system. And they don't realize that, oh, there's some red flags. This is just like normal. It's normal to burn out, right? It's normal to work long hours and just to go all in. So for that type of person, how would they discern their season of life?
Yeah, I feel like a lot of it, before I was married, talking to some of my single friends, it's the wisdom of having your self awareness to know where your motivation is coming from for that project. And you
Mm,
especially can tell whether or not it's the right season when the result you're aiming for doesn't happen as you expect it would. And then how do you react, right? Because if things are failing and you feel like this is the right season and God's asked you to push, you know, you may not feel as resentful. You may be able to process it in a more healthy way with the Lord. But if it doesn't work out, and you know, then you're like, wow, why did I work so hard? Was God calling me to this, right? And so I think the outcome and then your emotional reaction afterwards is a really good litmus test, because then afterwards you actually start asking yourself the right questions. Hey, why did I work so hard? Should I have done that? is now maybe a time for rest. And so it's not a one answer fits all. And I think it definitely takes, maybe the help of a therapist or a spiritual director in those instances to speak wisdom and truth into your life, because sometimes you're just too deep into it, right?
Hmm. Yeah. I'm willing to put myself out there for an example.
Yeah.
So I'm discerning what season I'm in. I think I
Mm.
know.
Okay.
So pretend you're coaching me. What questions would you ask me to help me discern?
When you're talking about seasons, the best way to kind of ascertain what's going on is it difficult right now to let go of something? And is there something that you're wanting to kind of do differently or reach out to change? And it's that tension of the like I want to let go of this, but I can't. And so it's like almost a like interrupted grief, right? And so can I ask you some questions, Alex, about like what is the tension of the season that you feel like you're in?
Yeah, yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so like, I would say, for me, the tension was like if I am to take this season of rest, then where is my value going to come from, right? And
Hmm.
so, for me, this season of letting go of the identity part of I need to work super hard. I need to
Hmm.
sacrifice so much in order to prove that I'm a good provider, business person, father is my core idol. I think that's beyond any other idol, any other like maybe vision I have of being more like Christ. And so maybe my question for you is like, what has been difficult to let go of in this season as you're kind of starting to transition to maybe a different season? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, I just transitioned out of my tech career for almost 10 years.
Yeah.
And now my wife and I are looking at expanding our business. So there's been a lot of work that we're putting in, a lot of time, effort, money. And so I think the most difficult thing would be to actually let go of that because it's our livelihood.
Yeah.
And so, but at the same time, I actually think I have a good identity in that I'm not so rooted in that. Like if this fails, then I think I'll be okay. Like, okay, let's just try again.
Yeah.
But I think we're definitely like focused on building this and doing like focusing on this as well.
Wow, that's awesome to hear that God's given you that more secure and stable identity to like move into this with an open hand, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So, like,
Yeah.
if that's the case, then I would kind of maybe anticipate you're feeling a lot of excitement, but not so much anxiety. Maybe some anxiety, but more excitement
Mm,
for this next stage of life. Would that be fair?
yeah, that's right.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's great. And when you think about like a vision for like this season, how is it different from your last season then? Because that's where I think the way that you see the difference can help you delineate whether the season is the same or not. Meaning, are you working just as hard as you were in your tech business or your tech job? Or are you working way more, putting way more hours, way more effort? Or is it something where you feel like you're actually doing less, but God's favor is giving you greater results? Because like for me, maybe I can
Mm,
just share really quick.
yeah.
I don't do any advertising. I don't even have an Instagram page. All I
Oh
do is
wow.
Yelp and Google. And I was so worried. I was like, God, is this gonna work? Because there are so many college counselors, and the marketing for this field is like a lot, right? But God's like, I don't want you to do that. I want you to focus on your students. I want you to focus on your family. I want you to focus on yourself and trust me. And even though I do pay $150 a month to like have Yelp give me like my logo on my Yelp page, so that I do pay. But consistently, God's given me 10 sales leads every single month. I'm already full with my student load. I could take one or two more, but that's up to me. And it's only April 10th, and so it's been amazing to see there's more favor but less work. And this is how I know it's confirmation that I'm in the season, because I can't make people email me. They have to read the
Yeah.
review, they have to want to contact me. And this is one way I really felt God's favor, God's blessing, and that I can take this rest for what it is, which is like, it's not about me, it's manna from heaven.
Hmm. Wow. That's when you know it's God. Like
Yeah,
you're not even like doing much. Well, I mean, actually you are doing a lot, but it's not like there's almost like a tailwind to it
exactly.
that you feel like the favor of God is on your life and he's giving you these leads. That's such an amazing experience to have. Yeah, I feel like for me too, I definitely feel that tailwind as well. I don't feel like, oh, this has to be successful, or I don't feel super anxious about it or overly anxious. I mean, yeah, there's a healthy level of anxiety with the
Mm.
uncertainty, but for the most part, I think it's good. I'm focused, I'm doing things, I love what I do. Yeah, it's not really tied to identity. So I think the season that I'm in is actually, it's good. It's not like, oh, I have to do this, or I have to be the provider, I have to be a man. But yeah, I think there's a lot of peace with it.
That's beautiful. So maybe it's
Yeah.
a continuation of your spring season where you're
Hmm.
investing and God's investing in you, right? Planting those seeds, and you're starting to see things grow. And, it's really nice to be able to plant it and see it grow, because when things grow, you kind of know you've done some work, but 90% it's God working, right?
Yeah, definitely. I want to pivot a little bit back to generational trauma. I'm curious to know, actually, for you, John, what practically and tangibly has helped you heal from hurts and pains from the past, from your relationship with your parents,
Hmm.
any other relationships, if you
Yeah.
can dive into that.
I'm really looking forward to talking about this, because I feel like when you have trauma from your parents, a key thing is, how do you reparent yourself, and how do you ask God to reparent you, right? Because our parents give us the first prototype of what it means to be loved, for better, for worse,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And so for me, the only way I experience my dad's love is basically giving me criticism, setting high expectations, and then when I failed, he let me know I failed and told me how to improve, right? So that is helpful in many ways, but that also does not breed a lot of trust, a lot of intimacy, a lot of desire to want to be close to that individual, right? That inherently must infect and really disturb your vision of who God is, right? Because how can you, one, I mean, I had no way to see God as a good Heavenly Father when you think anytime you screw up, my dad would do this thing where I would screw up, he would just look at me and shake his head, like put his head down, shake his head. And that's when I knew,
My mom would do that.
yeah, and it's so subtle, but because you've seen it so many times, it just creates in you such a sense of like shame, right?
Hmm.
And so when I started going to therapy, I had a Christian therapist who did inner healing work with me. He asked me to come up with a vision of basically, how I want to see God. Okay. And I'm a very visual person. I used to draw a lot. And I got this such a clear movie in my mind that I still remember to this day. So I was at a high school track meet, and I saw Jesus in the stands. He was watching me, and you know, I was very excited. I thought, okay, great, I'm gonna win this race. And the gun goes off. I'm running. I'm first, and I see Jesus cheering. And then all of a sudden, I'm falling behind, and someone passes me. Another person passes me, and when the competition ends, I'm last place. And I'm like, God, this vision kind of sucks. This is not what I had in mind for like you being my heavenly Father. But afterwards, I saw myself walking to the stands, walking to Jesus, and he just put his arm around me and was comforting me. And I still remember in that moment, God told me, John, it's when you're feeling at your lowest is when I enjoy being a dad, because I get to remind you, to me, you're still the greatest. And I just started crying. I was like, wow, that is the heart of the Father, right? That when you feel like you're the suckiest and you have nothing to offer, God's like, no, right? I, as a father, love to encourage you when you're down, because I see you for who you really are. And that vision has been something that God has given me as this amazing gift that I keep on going back to anytime I fail, anytime I mess up, that I know that His approval, His affection, His acceptance of me is not dependent on my performance. And that's allowed me to be able to trust Him, to love Him, and to obey Him.
Wow. Yeah, I feel like God's love in that vision. That's so beautiful. And I can relate to it because I did track in high school.
Oh, yeah.
And there were many times where I was last place. So, oh, that that hit me. How can someone tangibly connect God's love? And, earthly dads aren't perfect by any means, and we all know that. But we always hear about, oh, God loves you, like, God is love, all this stuff. We hear it so many times as Christians, but many of us haven't felt or
Hmm.
experienced the tangible presence of God's love. And even for me, in my experience, that's actually changed a lot of my generational trauma. It's just like, it doesn't affect me as much as it did like 5, 10 years ago.
Sure.
But for a lot of our listeners and viewers, they haven't fully experienced the presence and love of Jesus. So I guess my question is, how can one experience that?
Yeah, that's deep, Alex. I feel like that's a lifelong journey, right? Because just like John Calvin says, to know God and to know yourself are the two chief aims of man, right? And you cannot know
Mm,
one without knowing the other. And so I think for me, in addition to the therapy, I think it's been so important that I take that weekly Sabbath to have one day where I'm doing things I enjoy. And, for me, it's going on a hike, right? And taking a moment just to sit there, look at the scenery, and recognize God's given me this time to rest and to enjoy Him, and to really recognize that I don't deserve any of this. I think another way that's really helped me, a lot of people do gratitude journal. That's never really resonated with me, but I actually draw out all the great things that have happened to me during the week. And then I look
wow.
through that in my journal. And every time I'm gonna get, yeah, just no, yeah, excuse me for a second. And then I draw a picture of Jesus in that moment. So, for example, I was playing with my kids the other day, and we're just like laughing as we're wrestling. So I drew a picture of that, and then in my journal, I drew a picture of Jesus standing there in the bed with us, laughing with us, and I just started crying because I realized my dad never had a time where he felt he could be joyful with me, but because of the blessing of what God's done with me, and through my therapist and through just my inner work, I can enjoy this time with my kids. And even though in that moment I didn't recognize Jesus was there, when I drew in my journal Jesus there, it all came full circle. I found that exercise to be so transformative because when you're writing it, at least for me, I sometimes can't include Jesus in the moment, but when I'm drawing it and I draw a picture of Jesus, it's almost like I'm reimagining that moment with God by my side.
How's your relationship with your dad now? Does he know that he didn't give the love that you wanted or needed?
That to be honest is still pretty fraught. I mean, we've had some ups and downs. Just to share really transparently, my dad, he was sick a lot when he was a kid, and so he is kind of a hypochondriac. And
Mm,
so what happened was my grandfather got sick during COVID. It wasn't with COVID, but he was sick enough to be hospitalized. Long story short, I asked my dad to come because he lived in LA then. He said, I'm too scared because of COVID. Then my grandpa passed away. And I asked my dad to come to the funeral. And he said, no, I can't come. And I said, it's important that, you come because it's a family thing and he's your dad. And my dad still said, I can't come. And so since then, I think I told him, like, I need some time to process this because basically, he left it up to me and my uncle to take care of all the final arrangements. And I told him, hey, I need some time to process this pain because this feels like an abandonment, you know? And
mm,
similar to how you abandoned me when I was a kid a couple of times. And so I've emailed him here and there. One thing that my spiritual director, Mark, has encouraged me to do is, forgiveness is tough when you think about doing it in like one go. But he really encouraged me to think about what's the minimum viable, positive interaction you can have. And you know how in like tech, you talk about the MVP, the minimum viable product?
yeah.
He made it into the minimum viable positive interaction, MVPI, you know? And I was like, oh, Mark, you're a genius. And so I've been trying to email my dad basically like once a month, sometimes twice a month, and just keep it really short and positive. Here are 3 pictures of me and the kids. Here are 3 highlights, and like tell me some highlights from you. And so I think that's kind of increased some of the communication, which has been helpful. But yeah, I'll be honest, I'm still working through how to forgive him. He still does and says things that hurt me deeply,
Mm-hmm.
and I think I want to forgive him, but it's something I'm working through with my spiritual director and my therapist right now.
Hmm. If your dad was here in the room with you, what would you want to say to him?
I emailed him recently. I just said, hey, I forgive you for not coming to your own father's funeral. I know
Mm,
that he wasn't like a great dad, and I appreciate the ways you sacrificed and the things you gave to me. But I also recognize that you had some brokenness that you passed on,
mm,
and that is something that I recognize. Like some of it was just unintentional. And so I hope, Dad, that you can know that even though we're not talking now, I don't hate you. I don't feel like you're just a horrible person. But I see your brokenness, and I think right now it's maybe too broken for me to interact with. But I hope one day we can have a relationship where you can see me for who I really am, and I can see more of you for who you really are.
Wow. I love how you see your dad and acknowledge that he's got his own faults too, and you also honored him too. I love that.
Yeah, it's both. I think as you get older, and especially that now I'm a parent, I see the things I do to my kids that probably will cause a little bit of trauma as well. And
Sure,
it's
sure.
just the nature of relationships, right? The people that you're closest to are sometimes the ones you hurt the most, and it's always a cycle of repair and restoration, and that's okay, right? And so I hope I can do that more so with my dad one day.
John, if you were to have a conversation with your younger self, what would you tell him?
I think I would say angsty teenage John. I see that you feel really bitter about the ways maybe your parents didn't love you like you wanted to, the way some of your friends betrayed you, just some of the weaknesses that you have. But um, know that all of those wounds, it's actually a way that God's created for you to connect with Him and His pain on the cross, the pain of other people, so they know they're not alone, and the pain of the world, as the world is struggling under the weight of sin, under the weight of being imperfect. You're on your path to becoming that wounded healer that Christ is, which is it's through your wounds that other people can be healed, and Christ has set that example. And so I know you just look at those wounds like they're such a weight and burden, but it's not a block that you think it is, but it's actually a way forward. And so keep on walking that way, and you will see where God is leading you towards Him.
John, thank you so much for being so open, vulnerable, and transparent about everything. We talked a lot about different things here, from how do you discern your season, generational pains, and diving into your story. And I just want to thank you and affirm you that God's got a beautiful plan for you, and He's already crafted such a beautiful story in your life. So I just want to call that out. For people who want to find you or connect with you, how can they find and connect with you?
Well, I want to say thank you so much for asking such insightful questions and having me on, and your spirit, the essence of who you are. I can see the support and the care, and why God's called you to do this type of work. And so thank you for taking that leap of faith to do this, or else we wouldn't even be talking today.
Yeah.
Yeah, if people want to find me, they can go to my website, which is just aboundeducation.com. I don't have Instagram or any social media, but yeah, if God calls me that, I may start a page one day, and I'll let you guys know.
Wow. Thank you so much, John. Really appreciate your time. Would you like to pray for our audience?
Yeah, I'd love to. Lord, I thank you so much that when you look at us, uh, you see the best in each and every one of us as your children. At the same time, you recognize the things we're working on, and you see that too. And I thank you that you both can see the truth and see the pain and not be turned away from it, but also you see what we can become, a vision of one who is more like Christ, and you're cheering us on to that vision. So I pray for whoever's listening today that they would see themselves, see the vision you have for them, a vision of them more healed, more wholehearted, more complete, more joyful, and take whatever is their next step towards that vision, because that's where you're at. That's what you're calling each of us to be. And that's where we want to be, more like Christ, more of joy, more of peace, and more of you. Thank you, Jesus. Amen.
Amen.